King Thidrek and Vidgar were standing in front of the tent as they saw Amlung riding up. Vidgar said, "There rides Amlung, our comrade, and he has now recovered his horse. I would guess that, if it was young Sigurd as I thought, Amlung has given him gifts for the horses, and told him beforehand about their kinship, and spoken rather meekly. He would never have gotten them otherwise." King Thidrek answered, "I do not think that he took his horse or the other one from young Sigurd without his permission, but it could be that it was another man from whom he got what he wanted." Amlung rode up to the tent, and his father went out to meet him along with his comrades. They bade him welcome and asked him how he had gotten his horse. And Amlung said, "When I came to this mountain cliff, I found the man who had taken away my horse. I rode at him as hard as I could and struck my spear into his shield, and you can see the shield here. The spear shaft broke in two, but I still unhorsed him and struck him with a broken spear. And when I parted from him, I tied him to a linden tree. I used his belt and the bindings from his shield for that, and I also cut my sword strap before he was bound as well as I wanted. He is still there now, since I do not expect that he can lose himself." And they all said that he had regained his horse bravely, and offered him their praise for it. Vidgar spoke now to King Thidrek. "Now I am going to ride to where he said he found the man. If it is young Sigurd, as I think, then this has been done with trickery and deception. If he awaits me at the tree, then we shall not part before I know the truth, whether he is young Sigurd or another man." And the king was pleased with that. He now took his horse and said, "It is a great shame if that man has to stand there, bound, and cannot free himself. Now I shall certainly free him." And he rode away swiftly. Now Sigurd saw that a man was riding up to him. He cut his bonds and ran up into the mountains, and did not wish to have any dealings with the man. Vidgar rode to the tree and saw the bindings laying there, along with the pieces of the broken spear. Vidgar rode back and thought now that everything Amlung had said was true, and he told this to his comrades. Now Sigurd came into the hall to see King Isung, and told him his message and about his expedition in this fashion. "I came to the lordly tent I told you about, and there I met 13 men who are quite magnificent. Their chieftain is King Thidrek of Bern, and with him were the most noble warriors. We have often heard of their battles. Now we may find out for ourselves, because King Thidrek challenges you to a battle, along with 12 other men. And he sent you a horse as a gift of friendship, which I gave away to one of my friends who I met along the way." And now King Isung answered, "If he challenges me to a fight, then I will grant it to him very eagerly, and I shall not delay." The morning of the next day, King Isung took all of his best weapons and armed himself, and he commanded his men to arm themselves. Young Sigurd armed himself with all of his best equipment and mounted his horse Grani, and had in his hand King Isung's standard, and they all rode together out of the castle. They all had fair shields and white byrnies like silver, and polished helmets like glass, and were wearing swords as sharp as razors. They had strong spear shafts with sharp points, large horses that were well armored and very agile. These men were exceedingly strong and large and bold enough. And now they rode to King Thidrek's tent. King Isung spoke. "If King Thidrek of Bern is such a doughty warrior as is said, and such a valiant man, that he has offered us and our men single combat, let him now arise and arm himself, and come to meet our 13 men with his 13 men, and we will test our valor and ability, because it will be worse for him to hear that word which will be spoken before we ride home, if he shows fear and dares not fight." And now Thidrek answered, "You will not need to wait long, because we came hence, have put a long way behind us, and suffered many trials before we arrived from our journey. We will certainly carry out our mission, since we have better swords, stronger shields, harder helmets, and more strength and valor." And now Isung and his men dismounted, and Thidrek and his men armed themselves in the meantime, as well as they could. And now each group went against the other, and when they met, they divided up man against man. The fight was to be carried out as a series of duels, and no one was to help his comrades, and they were not to fight on horseback. Against Thidrek of Bern stood young Sigurd, and against King Gunnar stood Isung. Against Vidga stood the eldest and strongest son of the king, and the rest divided man against man. This is the first duel, and it is fought between Heimir and the youngest son of the king, who was a very big man. The two men fought valiantly, and when they had fought a while, it did not seem good to the king's son if he did not carry away the better lot from the man who was assigned to him. And he became very angry and cast his shield away, and took his sword in both hands, and struck at Heimir, and hit his helmet so that Heimir immediately fell to the ground. And now the king's son jumped on him and said, "If you want to keep your life, lie here quietly, and I will tie you up." But Heimir did not want that, and turned over with all his strength. But the king's son struck him with his knee against his ear, in the helmet, so hard that the helmet gave way against the skull, and the blood went out from Heimir's nose and mouth, and he almost lost consciousness. And at this moment, his hands and feet were bound. And now the king's son took his spear shaft and stuck it deep into the earth, and he bound Heimir's hands to it. He now went back to his men and asked for another man to come from the men of King Thidrek. But they said that he should sit quietly and that he had well earned his rest. And so the first duel was ended. Now Herbrand, the king's standard-bearer, went forward, and he was opposed by the second son of the king, and they had their duel. They fought for a long time, and neither spared his weapons on the other. The fight ended when Herbrand had 5 wounds that were not small, so that the blood ran from them, and he was tired. His strength ebbed, so that he fell to the earth, and he gave up his weapons, and was bound like the last one. And then the king's son went back to his men, and waited for the next fight. Vildifer now came forward, and against him came the king's third son, and they had their battle. It was extremely hard and very long. One could see great and strong blows in their encounter, and many weapons were spoiled before they parted. The king's son was bleeding from 5 wounds, and they were all large. But Vildifer had 7 wounds, and they were all large. He began to tire from his wounds and from the bleeding, so that he fell to the side and dropped his weapons. He was then bound, and the king's son parted thus from him, and went to his man, and had proven himself well. Sistram of Fenidi went forward from Thidrek's men, and the 4th son of King Isung came against him. They began their battle with great blows, and there was little distance between them, and neither gave way before the other. The sword Sistram had cut through helmet and birnie and shield as easily as it cut through cloth. The king's son had received 3 rather large wounds, but Sistram was still untouched. And now the king's son struck at Sistram's helmet with all his strength, so that his sword broke in 2. He was now weaponless. He now took his shield, because he was such a great fighter and a man of valor, that he would rather die than flee or offer truce. He sprang up at Sistram with his shield, and struck him so hard that Sistram fell on his back. Sistram could not get back on his feet, because he was bound both hand and foot. The king's son left him there, and returned to his man, and the way things were going seemed good to them. Fasold the Strong now went forth from Thidrek's man, and against him came the 5th son of King Isung. This battle began with the greatest bravery and valor, because the fighters were both very strong. And for a long time, one could not see who would get the better part, and each offered the other many blows, close together, and each went up close to the other, and neither gave way before the other. Each had given the other 2 rather large wounds. Now the king's son struck such a great blow on Fasold's helmet that he fell immediately into a swoon. And he stood over him and said, "Since you are such a brave and courteous man, how is it you fall from one man's blow? Stand up and protect yourself if you will." Fasold sprang up quickly and strongly, and now they fought very hard for a rather long time. Neither spared his sword, and this battle was very hard. It came into the mind of the king's son that this was a great shame, that I should stand here all day fighting with one man, when I thought that I could gain victory over 13 of him if necessary. He now struck so hard, and with such wrath, that he fell another time. And the king's son did not leave until he had bound Fasold like the others of his comrades. And on this meadow there stood now 5 spears, with one of Thidrek's men bound to each. The men of Bertangaland were now glad and thought things were going well for them. And with many of Thidrek's men having lost their duels, the overall situation looks rather grim. Tune in again next time to Sagenheim to hear about Amlung's, Högni's, Hildebrands, and Vidgar's duels, as well as Gunnar's and Earl Hornbogi's. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.